the unthinkable happens, when your world is shattered in an instant. How will you respond? Disasters strike without warning. Cyber attacks, natural catastrophes, or internal failures, each can bring chaos. Will you be prepared when the moment comes? Are you ready to act, to recover, to survive? What if the situation spirals beyond your worst nightmares? What if your systems are obliterated, your data is compromised, and every plan you had fails? True preparedness begins long before disaster strikes. It starts with a plan, tested, refined, and ready to deploy at a moment's notice. It's about resilience, recovery, and adapting to overcome. Are you prepared to rebuild from the ground up? Can you recover from the worst-case scenario? Are you really prepared? Episode 14, Navigating the Storm, Mastering Incident Response and Disaster Recovery.
Welcome to the Cyber Distortion Podcast. We're in Season 3, Episode 14. And guess what? Guess what that means? That means this is our last episode for this season. And Kevin, man, it's been a fun season. We've covered a lot of really important, really good topics with some amazing guests. I don't know how we pulled it off this year with the guests that we had, but man, we're stepping it up this year. And get this, it's going to be even better next year. We've already started lining up the guests for next year, and it's just starting to lay itself out like something we couldn't script any better than what it is, right? So we're going to be looking forward to getting started right away with Season 4, which will be scheduled to launch. Our first episode will be scheduled to launch sometime in Q1 of 2025. So be on the lookout for that as we continue to plan and modify, look at our season, and think about how we might want to do things slightly different, which I think might be a little bit hard this year when we start to look at it and figure out how we might make it even better. But we're definitely going to try. That's what we use this downtime for. And I'm just excited to get here and to get on to the next part, man, because it keeps getting better. So what do you think about all this, Kevin?
I think you're right, dude. It's been a good season for us. It's been fun. Like you said, the guests have been really great. We learned a lot about getting more efficient in our editing and in the way we roll these things out. Dude, I'm just excited. We picked up our first sponsor. You know, these are all big things, man. So I know we've got some really cool stuff that we've got planned for next season. We're going to, Jason and I talk about how we're going to take the off season, the holiday season, basically, and we call it going back to the lab, like Eminem used to do, back to the lab again.
Yeah.
We're going to try to make things better. We're going to try to figure out the best way to approach Season 4, and just see what we can do to spice things up. So, as you mentioned, we got some great guests already lined up. I'm fighting some serious allergies today and congestion, so I'm going to try not to stop down and get into a coughing fit, but I'll do what I can. But if I do, sorry, I'll apologize up front on that. So, but yeah, we got some great guests lined up. I've got my wish list, and I keep adding to it, Jason. I keep adding new names to it. People that we've met, people that we see in the, I guess we'll call it the cybersecurity circuit. The network, the bigger picture. We'll be reaching out to a lot of those folks to see if they want to come on with us next season. So we're pumped about that. But
I
tonight,
think, Kevin, I think one thing too is it's exciting to see the extension of our connection base now.
Oh yeah.
As we continue to meet great people and interview people and make more and more connections on a broader scale. It's exciting to see how many more people we've extended our connection base to, of professionals in the field.
And I'll say this, it's humbling, because when we first started, man, a lot of these people we didn't know. They didn't know who we were. We didn't know who they were. We attend a lot of the big conferences, and we see a lot of these people that have obviously made a name for themselves in the industry. And that's great, but we didn't know them, and they certainly didn't know us. So by having the podcast, it's put us in a little bit of a position to approach these people with reason, to try to bring them on and talk shop and just have some fun and network with them. So that's what's cool about doing this. And that's why you and I wanted to do this in the beginning. It's like, man, I want to give something back, and this is a great way to do it, but it's also a great way to network, which was a byproduct that we weren't even considering when we started this.
Yeah, it makes us better. It makes our content better. It helps us educate more people. It helps us all learn. And I'm just as much a steward of learning and connecting with people to learn than anyone. So I think that those are all just amazing, byproducts of what we're doing here. So
yeah, for sure.
Let's get into what we're going to talk about tonight, Kevin.
Yeah. So tonight's episode is the last episode for good reason. This one's our goodbye episode for the season, but it's also, this was a hard one, because we were like, how do we go through this, and how do we try to build an episode around this to help people, especially people that are new to this, without putting them to sleep? Because this is not the sexiest topic to talk about: incident response, disaster recovery, DR.
Yeah.
But we feel it's extremely, extremely important, especially as security practitioners or security leaders in our company, that this stuff.
Yeah, so because when everything goes bad, this is what's going to save your butt.
Everything goes to hell. You need to understand this stuff for sure. So we're going to talk about it. Hopefully, people learn something from this. I know I learned something studying for this episode. So I feel like it's going to be some good information for people to have. It's one of those that you're probably going to have to stop, pause, go back, re-listen to a couple things. But if you're really curious about how this stuff shakes out, this is a good episode for that. So we originally wrote this as a double episode. We've shaved it down because this is the last episode of the season. So we got all the relevant details, all the good stuff that needs to be in here, and kind of cut a little bit of the extra fluff out. So hopefully it's beneficial.
So tonight's episode is on mastering the storm, mastering incident response and disaster recovery. So all of that mysterious stuff Kevin was just talking about comes down to this title: incident response and disaster recovery. So as we said, when everything goes bad, this is the thing that's going to save your butt. How well you manage and put your plans together, how well you practice, how you're going to play, what your team makeup looks like, the policies and procedures and the controls that you've already been doing all year long to keep yourself in check. All of that comes into play when something like this has to be pulled and you have to start executing on it. So, Kevin, let's walk through it.
All right. We're going to start in the area of incident response. So, incident response, I'll just tell you the purpose of incident response. It focuses on the detection, the investigation, the responding to security incidences or breaches in real time in an effort to mitigate the damage and restore operations as quickly and efficiently as possible. So you've experienced a breach, you've experienced an outage. This is the area that focuses on mitigating the damage in real time as things are happening, as the walls are burning, and then recovering operations as quickly as you can.
And one point to that too is that an incident may not necessarily mean yet that you've had a breach or that you've had something go bad. You just know there's an incident and you need to start taking action to figure out, what is this? Is this an anomaly? Is this like something super bad that has led to a breach? What is actually going on in this? And that's really where this plan with everything starts at, is at the incident level. On a weekly basis, organizations can run many incidences to figure out what's happening and if it actually is something bad or if it's not. So this isn't something that just happens every now and then. This is something you're always are working at the incident level. Doesn't necessarily mean something big has happened. It just means that something's happened and you got to take action.
At some point, every disaster started as an incident, but not every incident results in a disaster.
Yes,
if that makes
right.
sense.
Yep.
So the scope of an incident response plan really is dealing with the immediate actions to handle a specific security event. It could be a cyber attack, a data breach, malware, ransomware, whatever. But obviously ransomware could turn into a disaster if it spreads. And that's when you get into your DR, the DR side of things. Activities involved in this piece of the discussion, well, you're going to need to identify the incident. You're going to need to contain the incident to prevent further damage or contain the threat. You're going to eradicate the root cause of whatever's creating the problem for you. It could be a breach, a system breach, maybe not. Then you're going to be focused on recovering your system. And then you've got to conduct a post-incident analysis and improve. How can we do this better next time? So the time frame generally around incident response events is going to be more short-term, the immediate actions that you're taking in the heat of the moment, as soon as an incident is detected in your environment. So incident response is really all about quickly addressing and mitigating the effects of a specific security incident, not necessarily a breach or not necessarily a disaster, I should say. It could be a breach. With the goal, the sole purpose, to minimize the immediate impact. So the best examples we could come up with for an incident response situation would be responding to a ransomware attack, handling a phishing attempt, or investigating unauthorized access to sensitive data.
And I'm just going to throw this out there, Kevin.
Analysis.
I'm just going to throw this out there because I'm sure we're going to talk about this several times tonight. But as you know, there's a tactic that I like to use that can help us all, help you.
Wait, is this ready. One of your what do you call it? Anagram? Not an anagram.
No, this isn't.
Acronyms.
This is a simple one. This is simple, right? And it hits right on those activities, like identifying the incident, contain the incident, eradicate it, walking you through how to actually do this stuff. And we're going to hear this often tonight. It's called tabletop exercises.
Oh, yeah. Tabletop. Yeah. Yes.
So,
of course.
So keep keen on that. We're going to get into that in more detail later, but know that this is going to come back up.
For sure. So after the incident response comes disaster recovery. So Jason, I'll let you talk to disaster recovery. That's the next big piece of this.
Yeah. So now, like, all hell's breaking loose. Something has gone really, really, really bad.
You've officially declared the walls are caving in on you. Right?
Yeah. And you got your entire team trying to hold it up as they're collapsing on you, and you're trying to figure out how to save the company. Right? Been there.
Yeah,
but
I know.
So disaster recovery is all about focusing on restoring IT infrastructure, applications, data, anything associated with how the business runs. And it even is to restoring the business after a catastrophic event occurs, trying to get your organization back into normal business operations. So there could be many things that can affect this. It could be natural disasters. They definitely could be. Could be things like fires within your building. It could be things that aren't necessarily a cyber attack on your building, but are still yet attacks on your on your business that then create a disaster that you need to have a plan on how to get your business operational again. Because disaster recovery is all about getting the business operational, making sure you're back functional again. It might be, in some cases, getting your employees back to work 100%, right? Not 10%. Or it might be getting systems back online and functioning and replaced, or backups restored, or it could be a number of things, data repaired and restored, in order to get full business operations back online. The scope could be extremely broad, but it's focused around long-term efforts to recover and maintain the business operations after a very significant disruption. So we hear this a lot when we hear about ransomware, because ransomware usually takes an organization's operations down for a very long time. And as a result of that, impacts the business. So that's an easy one that we think about when we hear cyber attacks. But again, as we said, it could be natural disasters. For example, tornado comes through and wipes out your corporate office. What are you going to do? How are you going to get the business back up running?
Yeah. Any act of God. Yeah. It could be a rogue employee.
Yes.
It's crazy. It could be a lot of things.
But
ultimately,
many
it results in a much bigger catastrophic event for you or for your company than just putting out a single system malware situation.
Yeah, it's a good point that you're making too, because remember when we started this podcast 3 years ago now, one of our first episodes, we were talking about some cyber attacks that occurred, one of them being a rogue employee who, before he left the organization, had planted malware that he wrote into industrial equipment, and then it was time bombed. So then he left. Mm-hmm. And several months later, this thing goes off, takes all this industrial equipment offline, and they had no backups, no copies. They had no way of getting that equipment back up and running again because the rest of their plan had not been in place. And this employee knew this, which is the reason why he did it. So it could be a number of things. Or she. True.
We don't know. True. It's not always a bad guy. It could be a bad gal.
In this case, I think they caught the bad guy. But
it was a bad guy. Yeah,
it was a bad guy. Some of the activities that we talk about here are like making sure you develop and maintain a disaster recovery plan. That's like that should just roll off your tongue every time you're talking about cyber and business operations within your organization. You should know that you have a disaster recovery plan, and you should know where it is. You should know it like the back of your hand. I used to have my teams take the playbook home with them so that they had a copy of it at home, physical copy of it at home, because one of the things you have to think about is mitigating risk controls. So what happens if we had a natural disaster? No one has the internet. And we got to get business back online. We haven't had, the internet's been down for days, right? How do we get the business back online? Well, somewhere we're going to have a copy of this stuff somewhere, and it's not going to be available digitally. So for those reasons, I would do things like that. Regularly test your disaster recovery plans. Again, tabletops is a good way of doing this, right?
Yep.
And another critical one, backing up your data and systems. And additionally with this is testing those backups. People forget to do this, right? They go through their cycles. They're like, yeah, I got a backup. I put it here. I got this one going here. I got this, right? But then you don't test them until you need it. And then you go to use it and it doesn't work. Didn't do you any good.
How many times, be honest with me, Jason, how many times have you gone to recover an old file that you know you still have? You were smart enough to hang on to this thing.
Yeah.
But you held on to it on media that you can no longer recover from because the media is too damn old. You don't have the tape deck to restore it, or you don't have the hardware.
Dude,
that's happened to us.
I can tell you right now, I can go in my basement right now and I've still got floppy disks that I have code that I wrote years ago on that back then I was like, yoo-hoo, I've got a backup.
People don't think about that. They think, okay, well, we got to back it up and we got to hang on to those backup tapes, or we got to hang on to the backup media. You also need to be sure something can still read that media that you held on to as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Especially, man, like when you're talking about industrial equipment, manufacturing equipment, things that don't change often, but your configurations or settings or things like that for that equipment, you want to make sure you have a copy of that, because as you migrate and change things over time, you want to make sure you can restore that back. So that's another critical piece.
Imaging systems is your friend.
So restoring critical systems and data backups, we just talked about that. And then ensuring business continuity during and after recovery. So this is, again, key. The word continuity, remember this, because you want to make sure your plan is extensive enough that when something happens, you're not 100% down, that you still can operate the business, that the continuity of the business continues on as you continue to fix or repair or put things in place to mitigate what has occurred. It doesn't always happen that way, and sometimes you do go down. Well, then you should have another part to that plan that says, well, if this happens, this is how we're going to execute to get things back up and running within our, acceptable tolerances that we have laid out for our customers. So in a disaster recovery plan, you really have to think about executing in restoring your systems, your infrastructure, your operations, everything that you can for as long as you possibly can. This isn't a Band-Aid fix type of solution. Like, this is I got it fixed, now we're back running, we're solid kind of a deal. Especially when we're thinking about ransomware, because things like ransomware, what happens in that scenario is you have to quarantine your stuff. You have to then take that and you have to run it through third-party forensics. You have to have a third-party forensics team come in and review it, non-partisan team review and do forensics against this to determine what actually happened and what occurred. That's important for your cybersecurity insurance claims that you will be placing. Now, when you go through and do all of these things and you have that quarantine and you do the work to have your equipment reviewed or your IT infrastructure reviewed, you want to be able to come back to them and say, and now we need you to also validate that we're clean and we're good to go, because that statement that a third party has validated that your environment is clean and has been fully restored and is now and the risk has been mitigated, that's the statement that you will take to your board and to your customers. It says, we had this problem, we validated it now by a third party that this no longer exists and we're good to go. So you want to make sure that's
going to be your public proclamation that you've gone through the diligence to clean up whatever the mess was, that your systems are safe, that you can resume business without putting them at risk.
Yeah.
This is the information you're going to share with the people that you're doing business with every day.
Absolutely.
So that's very important.
Absolutely. So, Kevin, let's talk about some of the life cycles, the incident response life cycle.
Yeah. So there's about 6 areas that we need to cover in the incident response life cycle. I'll cover a couple of them, and then I'll let you cover the next 2, and then I'll cover the last 2. But basically, you're going to always, and we learned all this stuff when we studied for our CISSPs. So a lot of this stuff is, kind of tribal knowledge at this point, because we've built a couple of these plans. But we'll just read the definitions to you, because that's the easiest way to explain what each one means. And then we'll just talk to them a little bit as we go. So preparation, obviously, this one's kind of the no-brainer of all of them. It involves establishing and training your incident response team, developing incident response, that's hard to say, developing incident response policies and procedures. There is a difference between policies and procedures. Ensuring that necessary tools and resources are in place. And the goal is to be ready to respond to incidents efficiently and effectively. We talked about this kind of in the incident response phase in the beginning, responding quick, responding efficiently, getting the systems back online, getting back in operation. So the more preparation you do, the more you are prepared and ready for when that incident takes place to recover and restore quickly. That's the whole name of the game there. Identification. One of the first things we talked about is identifying your root cause of the problem. So in this phase, the focus is on detecting and identifying the potential security incident or whatever is happening in your environment that's causing the problem. That involves monitoring systems and networks for signs of unusual activity. A lot of people will get this in the form of an EDR alert or something that's going to notify you in real time when something's taking place that you need to go do that analysis on. And then, of course, analyzing the alerts. That's what I just said. You want to analyze the alerts, determine whether an incident has occurred, because sometimes, a lot of times, in fact, more often than not, you're going to be chasing a false positive.
Yeah.
We see that every day in our world is you put in a piece of technology, you set it in your environment, it starts reading all this information quickly. It doesn't know good from bad in most cases when you first pop it on your network. It's still trying to learn. A lot of these systems have machine learning intelligence built in. They're analyzing what is normal for your environment and what isn't. So a lot of times, unless it's just a signature-based or a machine learning condition that matches something that's known to be 100% of the time malicious, it's still training itself. So most of these systems you're putting in place in the beginning, they're going to be noisy, and you're going to have to investigate and analyze those anyway. But then you have to start fine-tuning the technology. That's what we call properly configuring the solution for your environment. That's important.
Yeah.
And then accurate identification is crucial for appropriate response. Why? Well, obviously, false positives don't really need activity. They just need to be fine-tuned, and you need to train your technology. What is a false positive? What isn't?
Yeah, know when to take action and when you've got a false positive and their action maybe is just, tuning or correcting or configuring a little bit better. So the next one's containment. So once an incident is identified, as Kevin was just referring to, you have to contain that. You have to determine, hey, I know what's going on here. Let me stop this or it doesn't keep going or spread itself into other areas. The containment phase aims to limit its impact and prevent further damage. So you've got an impacted area. Let's keep it to that. Let's not have anything else impacted out of this. This can be done through short-term measures to stop the immediate threat and longer-term strategies to eliminate what the root cause was to begin with. So think about it that way, because time is of an essence when you're doing containment. Make that identification, move forward to contain it within a short-term fix, while also coming back, buying yourself time to think about what root cause is, and then putting in a long-term fix as you go along. The next one after that would be eradication. So we've identified it. Now we've contained it. Now we got to make sure the stuff is gone. As we were saying earlier, that at the end of the day, you want that proof of clearance to your customers, to your board, and you only get that once you've gone through all these steps, and eradication is a very important one. So after you contain the incident.
By the way, eradication is important whether it be one system that's hit or 50 systems that are hit. It's the same thing.
Yes.
It's just a matter of how long is it going to take me to go through those steps.
Absolutely.
Because once you determine what the issue is, you have to completely eradicate the problem to give yourself confidence to know I can put this system or this piece of equipment back into my production environment with no risk.
Absolutely. CrowdStrike. That's an example.
CrowdStrike, Tadium, whoever you happen to be, Sentinel-1.
Yeah. So the eradication phase involves removing threat from the environment, whatever was causing it, including deleting malware, closing vulnerabilities, and ensuring that the system is clean and secure. So eradication helps to prevent the incident from reoccurring again because you know you have a clean bill of health. You've got it totally out of the system.
Yeah. And then after eradication, we got recovery. So the recovery phase focuses on restoring the affected systems or assets back to their normal operation level while ensuring, as we said, that the threat has been fully eradicated. You don't want it halfway eradicated. You want to make sure it's completely back to the way it was before any of the incident took place.
Yep.
Because otherwise you're taking a chance on that risk spreading further in your environment, and then you've got a nightmare DR scenario.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this recovery phase, after you've eradicated the threat, may involve restoring from some of those tape backups we talked about earlier that are in your basement on the old floppy drives.
And it may involve restoring from a later version than you would really want to restore from, to give yourself enough room of safety to ensure that this incident, whatever caused this incident, isn't also existent on those backups.
Yeah, part of your forensics steps are to try to identify when did this, let's just assume it's malware, when did this malicious piece of software find its way into my environment and onto this system? And if you can determine that, you can safely know how far to go back to recover your system without reintroducing that threat as quickly as you eradicated it.
Yeah.
So it's very important to understand, do as much analysis as you can during that eradication phase so that you can know, how am I safe going back a week? Do I need to go back 2 weeks? Maybe I need to go back a month. But every time you go back further, you lose more data. So just things to keep in mind. You got to rebuild your systems. In other words, you're going to reinstall all your software. You're going to reconfigure software. You're going to reinstall print drivers, things like that, if it's a PC. And then you got to monitor it for a little bit for any signs of residual issues. So don't just recover it and throw it back on the network, plug it right back into that Cat6 cable and let it take a chance on reintroducing another problem. Test it. Turn it on. Maybe power it up in a sandbox. But you need to know with 100% confidence that you captured it all. And then the last and the most important step, in my opinion, is taking all of the stuff we just talked about and going through a lessons learned exercise. You need to analyze the incident, understand what happened, why did it happen, what was your shortfall, why did this happen in your environment on your system, and how well did you handle it? Did you miss a patch? Did you miss an update? Was it a 0-day? You need to be able to answer all those questions, because the goal here is to improve for future incidents. If you're not learning, you're going backwards. Yes. Every time an incident occurs in your environment, you need to be learning from that exercise.
Tabletops.
I
have learned every time I've done tabletop. So that's the only reason why I'm throwing that one out there.
I was the guy, I'm going to admit this. I was the guy that thought tabletops weren't all that valuable.
I know you did. I know.
And I would fight them tooth and nail. I was like, oh God, another freaking tabletop. Because when you do a lot of tabletops, you start to question, is there really a value in this, until you've done 2 or 3 in a row and you're like, okay, I took something away from that. I took something away from that. I took something away from that. Every time you get into deep conversation about the process in a tabletop, you're going to realize there's a lot of things you don't know.
Yeah.
And
or
those
just
are the
even
things
simple things,
that
like
become your
sometimes how
action
people
items.
respond. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah,
So
for sure.
lessons, going back to all this. So lessons learned, very good piece, because it could simply be someone didn't execute something the way they should, according to policy and procedure. Right. It could be things like that. It's just things you might learn.
That piece, that phase, that last piece of it is crucial to continuous improvement.
Yeah, absolutely.
You have to do your lessons learned. Or some people would call that a post-mortem exercise, but it's basically going back through everything in your head that you took notes on and that you evaluated, and all the things you learned in the analysis of what happened, and how you recovered it and everything that you realized during that time that you had done right in preparation for something like that, and what was missing. What could you have done better? Because that's what's going to make you faster at this next time.
Yep.
Every minute that system's down or every minute that segment of your business is down is money lost.
Yeah. Let's just hope that's all that's lost.
Yeah.
In worst cases, I mean, it's jobs lost, right? It's people, not just your people's jobs, but your customers, employees, because they can't operate and work because they were dependent on you. So there are residual effects associated with it.
Yeah, for sure.
So in any case, we covered a whole bunch, Kevin. Let's go to break and let's summarize some of this stuff for our customers, for our audience. And then let's come back.
Our listeners, not customers.
Yeah.
Oh, wait. Hey, maybe we could sell them something.
Oh, yeah.
You want to sell them? You want to sell them something?
Let's do that.
I would sell. So if you listen to this podcast and you want to buy something from me or Jason, let us know. Maybe we'll sell you these headphones. Maybe we'll sell you a hat. Maybe we'll sell you one of these swaggy looking shirts. Just let us know. We'll sell you something. We're going to open up a swag store soon. So we're going to have stuff out there.
Yeah. The swag store is going to be coming back online. All right. With that, we're going to go to break and we'll be right back.
All right.
Do zero-day exploits and supply chain attacks keep you up at night? Worry no more. You can harden your security with ThreatLocker. Imagine taking a proactive, deny-by-default approach to cybersecurity, blocking every action, process, and user unless specifically authorized by your team. ThreatLocker helps you do this and provides a full audit of every action, allowed or blocked, for risk management and compliance. Onboarding and operation is fully supported by their US-based support team. Stop the exploitation of trusted applications within your organization to keep you running efficiently and secure, protected from ransomware. Worldwide, companies like JetBlue trust ThreatLocker to secure their data and keep their business operations flying high. To learn more about how ThreatLocker can mitigate unknown threats and ensure compliance for your organization, visit threatlocker.com.
All right. We are back. Jason, you ready to get into this?
I am. Come on.
I'm feeling good. I went and got myself some hot tea for my throat. Delicious. No caffeine, just tea. I don't want to be up all night.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's jump into this, Jason. If you're dealing with a disaster recovery scenario, you've had an incident, shit's gone south in a hurry. Now you're declaring that disaster. Are you doing that by yourself?
Absolutely, man, because I'm the man. I'm the big dog. I know how to do this. Yeah, and
I thought
happens? You know what happens? And
What?
Then everything burns.
Yeah, this is not a one-man job or a one-woman job or a one-person job.
Absolutely not, man. There's no way possible you can shoulder handling an incident and even disaster recovery on your own. Nor do you ever would want to. It's like just I would just walk away. I'm already done if I had to do that. I won't win. So just walk away. But to that point, Kevin, it does take a team. It takes a team. It takes many people.
To your point of walking away, that would be a resume generating event.
Oh, yeah. So let's talk a little bit briefly about some of the team makeup, because there's a lot of roles that could be on this team. I will caveat this by saying first is that you have to build a team that's right for your organization, your size of your organization, and how your organization can effectively execute incident response plan and disaster recovery plans. You have to build your team that way. There are some key aspects to a team that I'll cover, but you have to build your team that way. So first, this is a key aspect. You got to have an incident response manager. You got to have somebody that is calling the shots, that's pulling everything together.
The one running the show. Yep.
Yeah. And that can be called a number of different things that you're in your organization. You might have a security analyst, should have a security analyst that can review it from the perspective of security potential incidences that are occurring currently and that could be occurring within your environment because of the MO or the tactic or the pattern that's being exposed or the information that you're getting from some of your security tools. A forensics analyst, yes, but you may not have this person on staff, nor would you have a threat researcher on staff. Typically, these are third-party organizations that you hire that come in to do this work for you. And the reason for
or oftentimes, if you're in a DR scenario and you're exercising a cyber insurance claim, they will most likely, in a lot of cases, offer these services to you as part of that policy.
Yeah, well, in most cases, they will say you need to use our selected provider that we're going to bring to you to do this work. So, so that's how that part works. You will always have your IT support staff, your internal development team, managers or directors from that team might be involved in this. And for the reasons of it might be related to code that was recently released or a ticket that got executed on that may or may not have been properly executed by your IT team. It could be a number of these types of things. You would definitely need to have legal and compliance as a part of your team. Because once you understand what's happening or what actions you want to take, you need to notify legal and compliance, because legal and compliance might say, no, you can't do that. We want you to actually do this instead, because we have to fall within these GRC, rules or regulations for whatever reasons, for EU companies or for domestic companies or for whatever reporting potentials you have to do. And then you want to have a crisis management team. And that one is pretty broad, but your crisis management team is basically covering things like talking to your stakeholders, making sure everyone's being communicated to clearly, making sure management knows what's happening. Again, you can handle this several different types of ways, but having someone like this that could handle that for you would be on your team. And then external incident response partners, as we talked about, that might get brought in from your cyber insurance company, or it just might be a third-party provider that you're using. And that might be able to give you some eyes on the ground, or maybe a VCISO in your organization to help you understand what your potentials are, what levers you can pull, or what new tactics you can try. So all of those pieces are important. But the biggest thing, Kevin, I think a team is important. Know who your team is, because your team, that team, will be executing on those tabletops constantly. That's what they're going to do, right? And that's where you use your team inside and out. I think for sake of time, let's talk about the plan, because the plan that this team executes is extremely important. So why don't you take us through that a little bit, Kevin?
Yeah. Real quick, just one final point on the crisis management team. It's very important that your employees know what to do in a situation, not to make matters worse. But
absolutely,
it's even more important for them to understand what not to do. And I think of large companies that are breached that are going to have media there on day one. If it's a big enough event, they're going to have media in the parking lot with cameras, sometimes with microphones, and they're trying to get sound bites. If your employees are out there saying, well, yeah, we got breached, or, that's not good. So hopefully a company that size would be training their employees on what not to do in addition to what to do.
Right.
You never want to, there's always going to be a dedicated team. Usually within that team is a dedicated person that's responsible to do all of the media outreach or the external communication outside of your company. That's not for the employees to do. That's not for the IT team to do. That's not for anybody other than them to do. That can lead to some really big problems. So, yeah. And as Jason said, let's get into the actual plan. Jason, you said something in an earlier episode. I like to repeat this a lot. You need to practice how you're going to play, right? mean, that's what the incident response plan is all about.
Yep. Practice how you're going to
run
play.
book. It is your run book. So first and foremost, I would say each incident response plan needs to have an established set of goals and objectives. So you need to talk about and discuss, what is this incident response plan? What are we aiming to achieve? It could be to mitigate damage, reduce the recovery time on an event, preserving evidence. That should be part of the plan. You need to set clear objectives as a guide for your incident response team to follow. And these are the actions they're going to look to during the event. And this needs to be documented.
I would say one thing, Kevin, right there too, without going down the rabbit hole too far, I am going to dip my toe in it though, is that you only know the goals and objectives that you want to focus on in this plan by doing other things, like by knowing what your risk appetite is, knowing what your risk levels are.
Oh my gosh,
right?
yeah. So you could do a whole episode on that.
Yeah, because if you haven't done a risk assessment and fully laid out where your risk is, what your tolerance is, what you're willing not to be tolerant on, right? If you don't do that, then you don't know where to write these goals, right? These goals are going to be in alignment with that, because, you're going to see like, well, we got to have, uptime of X, and we've got to have our data has to be as new as whatever, right? And our maximum tolerable downtime can only be this, right? Well, you've learned those things, you've set those markers because you've done your risk assessments. So far you've known where your risks lie, and you know what it will take for you to really get your environments running again and fully operational. And that's how you're setting those measurements. And that's how you're going to set your goals and objectives.
Yeah. And those assessments define what your risk appetite is. They help you to understand it. There are calculations for this that are out there. They're all over the web. We didn't spend any time in any of that tonight, because that technically all would lead into everything we're talking about tonight.
Yeah.
So the risk assessment is probably as critical as defining your incident response plan. But understand, it's a preliminary exercise that defines your risk appetite so that you know what it is your company is willing to say we're okay with and we're not okay with.
Right.
And that helps you define these goals.
Exactly. So the next one on the list is, as we said, assemble an incident response team. We already talked about that in detail, but that's another key piece to it. You got to have a plan. You got to have a team. All right, Kevin, what's the next one?
Incident response policies and procedures.
Absolutely.
Policies are more high level. They outline the scope, your responsibilities at a high level. What is it that we believe as a company, and how are we going to execute that particular policy? So it's not the steps on execution. That's your procedure. So policies are high level documents that say company A is going to do B, C, and D, right? The procedure is how you accomplish B, C, and D.
How you execute on it.
That's how yes. So the procedure is more detailed steps for each phase of your incident response lifecycle that we talked about earlier. Each step for preparations, for identification of a potential incident or even a breach, how you're going to contain it. So you'll have a containment procedure. You're going to have eradication procedures. How do you get rid of the threat once it's identified? How do we recover? Where are our tape backups stored? All of this needs to be documented in these recovery procedures. And then, of course, there's going to be a procedure for how do you exercise that lessons learned phase too.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the procedures are your detailed steps.
Okay. So the next one is implement a detection and monitoring mechanism. So this might be an MDR, an XDR, an EDR, It might
or
be
all the R's.
any of the R's, right? It could be anything that is going to give you immediate feedback that something is going on and what the potential incident is related to. Gives you some foothold to start researching and understand what you might need to start looking at to contain. And it might be multiple systems. It might be multiple tools that you're using for this. That's looking at the problem from different angles. But this is an important one to the strategy.
Yeah. The next one's very important. It's your identification and classification criteria. And of course, the prioritization lands in that as well. Every company probably needs to document a one-page flowchart, so to speak, that says this is our incident response communication procedure based on the level of the incident. It may be a 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. 5 is the world's fallen down and all hell's breaking loose. 1 is you got a system with a monitor that's broken and you got to go address that. Maybe someone's hard drive failed. It's impacting one user only. Somewhere in the middle lies a critical system that's taken down one of your facilities, but it's not impacting customers and it's not impacting anyone else.
Yeah.
That would probably be a 2 or a 3.
Yeah.
And then they just get progressively worse. Tornado hits the building and wipes it out. That's a 5. So I would highly recommend that you identify and classify the events based on your company's appetite for outages and for recovery times, and then keep that flow chart going down. If it's a 1, where does it end? You eradicate it, you close the work order, you move on with life. If it's a 2, you eradicate it, maybe you communicate to a few people, then you close the work order, you're on with life. If it's a 3, you eradicate it, you communicate up, maybe it gets communicated to other managers. Then it's determined if, based on the root cause, was it a cyber incident that you need to report even up higher? It might even float up to a 4 at that point, based on was data stolen? Were credentials leaked onto the dark web? These kind of things need to be addressed in the initial classification and prioritization of the event, so you know how to communicate. How far does that communication go?
Yeah, this is one of those things you're going to refer to when something happens. You're going to say, okay, we got a severity 3 or SEV 3 event or SEV 4 event or SEV 1 event. And everyone knows what that means. They're going to go look at the playbook and they're going to be like, SEV 1, okay, this is what I need to do. And they're going to execute on it because you've already got that documented.
As you're doing those tabletops, you need to be asking your incident response team, hey, in a SEV 3, where would we communicate if this were to happen? Who would handle what role? And those need to be defined. In a SEV 5, it's going to take you a while. That's something that might take you all day to walk through. Yeah. If it's a SEV 5.
Absolutely. All right. The next one is create a communications plan. So now, you've got to be able to know who to communicate to, when you should communicate with what tiers of people in the organization, when, if you got a SEV 3, when is it appropriate to then now communicate to management, to the executive team? When is it important to communicate with the customers, right? All of those things are going to be in this communication plan. So that's another really key, important piece.
Develop strategies for containment, eradication, and recovery. So you need to define short-term and long-term containment strategies to limit the impact of any kind of incident. You're going to want to outline steps for eradicating threats and vulnerabilities from your environment. Again, this kind of goes back to those procedures we were talking about. Create a recovery plan to restore systems and services to normal operations while ensuring that the threat has been fully removed. Again, Don't plug that system that you think you've cleaned up back onto your network until you know it's been completely cleaned up.
Yeah, another important one is establish documentation and reporting procedures. You're not just going through these steps and not also documenting the steps that you're taking and the findings that you have along the way, because eventually you're going to come back and do this post-mortem and you're going to review all this documentation and you're going to see what you could have done better. So you got to have documentation and reporting procedures down.
Training. Conducting training for both your IR team and your employees. Your awareness programs are huge here. Your IR team needs to know what are the steps in the event of every type of scenario, and then raise this culture of awareness within your organization so that your employees aren't afraid to report something that they've done wrong. Because the sooner they're able to tell your IT team, hey, maybe I shouldn't have clicked on that form and entered my username and password because it seemed weird. Okay, great. Now you got something that you can work with. You can go do something about that.
Yeah.
So educate them on the importance of not hiding it, but being open and clear about it so that you can actually take action.
Yep. Perform regular test drills and tabletops. This is critically key to making sure you know how to play the way you've been practicing, right? So don't practice haphazardly, because when game day comes along and when incident day comes along, that's how you're going to perform. Make sure you're ready to perform up to speed when that happens. And so regular testing of your environments, your systems, your early warning systems, your monitoring, run drills, and definitely do tabletops.
Absolutely. The next one's very important, especially the bigger the company is. So if you're a big company, you want to establish external relationships with these entities that are going to be involved if you do experience some sort of a major disaster in your organization.
Yeah.
That could be your local law enforcement and regulatory bodies, any kind of specialized consultants that you might need to discuss and help walk you through recovering from an event of that magnitude.
Yeah.
And the other one I'll say, and a lot of people don't think about this one, is if you have a cyber insurance policy, most cyber insurance companies offer free walkthroughs and tabletops. So you could call them and say, hey, look, I want to know if all hell broke loose on me tomorrow, what's that going to look like? And where are you guys going to fit into that mold so that I'm not caught with my pants down trying to figure this out the day of.
Yeah.
So Talk to them. They're usually going to assign somebody that is an incident response contact to you that you'll be working with directly.
Yeah. And the last one is review and update the incident response plan regularly. I can't tell you this enough. This is not a do it once and document it and then walk away from it and forget it. It's not even a do it once, document it, and then just keep pulling back the same practices and documents that you've already written once. This is at least annually, you have to review that plan. At least annually. And in my opinion, every time you do a tabletop and you learn something, you need to go back and update that plan. This is an iterative process throughout the year. As technology is changing within your organization, you're having to change your plan. Yes, sir.
I'm going to call a timeout here, sir, because I've got something very critical to interject. So this is free advice, and I love giving free advice. This is stuff that we've learned the hard way over the years. Build yourself a document repository, whether it be in SharePoint, OneDrive, whether it be in a database with a fancy web front end, who cares? Build a repository that everybody involved in this incident response process knows where to go. And to Jason's point, you're going to want to back that up on an external media somewhere that you can take off site, maybe even have a printed copy of it if you need to. But the reason you want to do this primarily isn't so that it's all in one place. That's a great perk. But the real benefit to this is that you need to establish a procedure internally within your IT group, within your DR team, that says, we are going to analyze every piece of documentation in this documentation library at least once a year. And the author that authored that document, if they're no longer with the company, we're going to reassign it. Somebody is going to go through every word of that document and confirm that it's still accurate and relevant. It's the last thing you want to do is get into a situation and say, oh, well, we've got documentation for all that. And then get into the situation where you need to use it and it's 5 years old and it's outdated.
And none of it applies.
None of it applies.
Yeah.
Because technology moves fast. You need to be moving with it. So review these documents at least annually and have someone sign off on them that they reviewed it.
Yes.
Put some accountability behind it. Trust me, you're going to want to do that.
Absolutely. And with that time out, Kevin, I think it's an appropriate time for us to take another break.
Yep, let's do it.
All right.
The Cyber Circus Network, also known as the CCN, is a collaboration of cybersecurity-focused podcasters who collectively bring over a century of experience in the field. The network includes Philip Wiley, host of The Philip Wiley Show, Chris Glandon, host of the Barcode Security Podcast, Kevin Pentecost and Jason Popillion, co-hosts of the Cyber Distortion Podcast, Justin Hutchins and Len No, co-hosts of the Cyber Cognition Podcast. Together, they offer a wealth of knowledge, insights, and stories that transcend the ordinary, aiming to demystify the complexities of cybersecurity for a broad audience. CCN engages in live podcast events and discussions, providing platforms for meaningful conversations and shared experiences within the cybersecurity community. Their mission emphasizes giving back to the industry through education and fostering a sense of belonging among professionals and enthusiasts alike. For more information about their podcasts, events, and services, you can visit their official website. Go to www.cybercircusnetwork.com.
All right, welcome back, guys. This is the final segment of this episode. And I know we've been going through a lot of information. Hopefully you're staying with us. This isn't easy, and it's just so much to know as you start to go through incident response and disaster recovery. Hopefully you can use this as a guide to help you figure out how to put the right policies and procedures and put an incident response plan in place that will work well for you. But we're going to keep going. And, Kevin, I think we're going to have to talk a little bit more now about ransomware. And ransomware is just a nasty little thing. Once you get bit by the ransomware snake, it can do one of two things, man. It can poison you really super bad and take you out of the game. It can give you a really bad infection and piss you off and you overcome it and you survive. Or, I don't know if it does anything positive, man. I mean, everything about ransomware is bad. Now, maybe if you're doing all of the things that you're supposed to do, it just becomes no more than a pimple and you pop it and you move on, right? It could
I've
be
seen
anything
ransomware. You said something important there. It could drive you completely out of this industry if you ever had to deal with it and you weren't prepared to deal with it. Yeah. I can see where a lot of people would be like yanking their hair out of their head. Yes.
Yeah.
Especially in a widespread ransomware attack. Not a good day at the office.
No.
And in fact, not a good weekend or several days at the office when you're trying to recover from something like that.
Yeah. That could be really bad. So let's just talk about a little bit around some strategies that you can use of prevention from ransomware. So one is doing regular backups. And regular backups, as we talked about earlier, just basically saves you so that if all hell breaks loose, you can go rebuild your environment again with some clean backups and get back up and running.
Amen, man. Patch management, number 2. Keep your software up to date. Microsoft has Patch Tuesday every month for a reason. That should mean that it's install patch Wednesday every month, right
or
after
Thursday.
this,
Yeah.
or close enough. Don't let recently released patches sit uninstalled for weeks at a time. Get them installed as quickly as you can. You will thank yourself later because you will be in the minority of people that are probably less likely to get breached by those known vulnerabilities. By the way, when Microsoft releases them, they're known to the hackers and to the good guys.
Absolutely. Network segmentation. This is a super important one. People forget about this one often, but this is basically saying creating a barrier in your network so that if one part of your network gets breached and goes down, it can't travel and migrate its way to other areas of your network and also impact those other areas of the network. You firewalled them, to speak, not literally, but you firewalled them, or maybe literally, but you firewalled them. You've created a separate segment for that part of the network, and there's no easy way for that to jump across the fire line and get to that other part of the network. So segment your network.
Segmentation, baby. It's a big one. Number 4 is endpoint protection. You need to deploy advanced endpoint protection that includes antivirus and anti-malware and behavioral analysis components. If you think about what your next generation EDR tools do, that's what they're all about. That advanced level of protection that uses machine learning and behavioral analytics to determine if something weird is going on a system. It's not always just about signature files like it used to be 20 years ago.
Yeah. Email filtering. So use email filters to block malicious attachments, links, they're common vectors, that they can deliver ransomware in, but constantly looking over those vector spaces that hackers use to plant ransomware, through the user, right? So email filtering is one of those.
Yep. And the next one, of course, speaking of user training, it's still a fact today. 95% of all breaches that we read about in the news started with human error.
Is
started
that
between
so,
the
Kevin?
keyboard and the chair.
Is that so, Kevin?
It's so, baby. I've said it 100 times and I'll keep saying it. If you train your employees, they are your last and your first line of defense in many cases.
Absolutely. Yeah,
So
absolutely.
train them on what to look for. They need to understand the red flags in every email and in every aspect of cybersecurity awareness. It's not always email based, but most of the time it is.
Yeah. Access controls. So you will hear things from us, and we will have an episode on this next season on zero trust. When we look at access controls, a methodology around access controls would be a zero trust methodology. And the reason for this is because what we're basically saying is controlling access to assets within your network there's a number of different strategies you can use for this. But at the end of the day, we're all trying to do the same thing. We're trying to limit what could possibly happen based on what you have access to. If you have access to everything under your user account, then everything will be exposed to a hacker if a hacker was to compromise your account. So when we think about access control, we're needing to really pay attention to only giving access to the things that you really need when you need it. That's an area Zero Trust does a good job on. But without Zero Trust, there's also some things you can be thinking about and putting in place in terms of what should you access either from a data standpoint or from an application standpoint or from a network segment standpoint. What should you have access to and what should you not have access to should be very well defined and defined by your job role and function.
Yeah. And you mentioned Zero Trust. The next one, application whitelisting, is another prime example of Zero Trust. You can application whitelist only applications that should be running in your environment and block everything else. There are great solutions out there for this. One of them is ThreatLocker. We have some good friends over there, and their solution does a really good job of this. This isn't a plug. It's just a reality. There's solutions out there that will do this for you and make this part of your life much easier. Don't even worry about, oh, were they able to run some malicious code? Well, no, they're not, because it's not whitelisted. So assume everything is malicious and only whitelist the things that you know you need to run your operations.
Yeah,
That's
we've
how that
seen
works.
them demo this to us.
Oh, it's cool stuff.
And it is really good stuff. They've done a really good job with this one. Again, I mean, go where it works, right? Find people that are doing things like this very well, and they're one of them. The last one we have on here is multi-factor authentication. This also gets missed by a lot of people, which I still can't understand why in this day and age we're still talking about the necessity to do multi-factor authentication. There should be multi-factor authentication everywhere. This shouldn't even be an issue anymore. Shouldn't even be contemplating if you should do it. It should just be. But I've been at conferences where the question was asked, how many of you guys have multi-factor authentication in at least one place? And there were many hands that did not go up. And then when asked further, like, how many of you have multi-factor authentication throughout multiple layers of your organization? Even fewer hands were going up. So multi-factor authentication is a key piece, because basically it's saying you have to have more than one form of identification in order to authenticate you to do something. And without multi-factor authentication, it's a lot easier for a hacker to get access to what they want to do. So
for sure. Well, let's jump into real quickly some of these response strategies that we've outlined here.
Yeah.
And then we'll get into a few other things that you do need to consider here. But first, response strategies. So obviously the incident response plan, you need to develop and regularly update your incident response plan specific to ransomware attacks, and include steps for containment, eradication, recovery, and communication all the way down the chain, depending on, as we said earlier, the severity level.
Yeah. Isolation, immediately isolate affected systems to prevent ransomware from spreading. We talked about that in terms of containment earlier. And just want to make sure you're not letting that stuff spread like a rash.
Like a rash. The other one, identifying ransomware and determine the specific type of ransomware. Understand its behavior and possible decryption tools or solutions if you choose to not go immediately into cyber insurance. And if you don't have backups, you always want to have backup solutions in place. You always want to have secondary images of systems that you can recover from. But if you ever get caught with your pants down, there is always a chance that you might be able to reverse engineer the ransomware as well. I know somebody that did that, who I might be looking at right now.
I do too.
And it worked.
I'm so thankful that person could do that.
Yeah. I don't know where that person learned how to do that kind of wacky stuff.
Yeah. All right. Well, next one, notify authorities. Notify the authorities when something happens. Now, one thing to think about with this is when we say authorities, we're saying, first of all, want to notify your cyber insurance. They're going to give you a plan that will include, most often, for you to contact the proper authorities, local or government authorities, to report this. Now, before you do this, we want to bring in your legal and compliance teams and make sure they're aware of what's happening as well, so they can give the proper guidance on who to contact and when to contact them. But yes, notifying authorities.
And one thing that goes hand in hand with notifying the authorities is preserving evidence. We call this, in the world of cybersecurity, the chain of custody. You do not want to taint the evidence. What you're talking about here in a situation where there's especially a cyber breach scenario, that's a crime scene. So you need to preserve your logs, you need to preserve the evidence and the state of the system that's been impacted through analysis for as long as possible. So what do? Get it off your network, first off. That's the one thing you can do safely. But don't power it off. Don't wipe it clean. Don't run a malware scan on it. Keep it in the state that it's in. If you clearly know it's been attacked and hit with ransomware, one of the key things your insurance company is going to ask you is, did you preserve it? in its state that it was in right after the attack.
It is a crime scene. The next one is communication. Again, we talked about this earlier, but communicate internally, communicate externally. Make sure you have the right communication going out to the right people and the right stakeholders are involved.
Restoration. The restoration is basically the backup. You're going to restore systems from backups. Once you know that the ransomware has been eradicated, you're done with your forensics. Now you need to recover the system. You need to ensure that your backups are clean and unaffected by the ransomware. This goes back to us saying that you need to determine where is that restore point that you want to go to recover that system so that you know it's going to be a clean restore.
Yeah.
Last thing you want to do is reintroduce the same problem right back into your environment and have to fight it again.
The last one is post-incident review. We talked about this earlier too. Want to make sure we're reviewing the incident and we're taking away lessons learned, updating our documents, updating our plan, and making sure we keep everybody informed. So Kevin, let's talk a little bit about some of the other things that we need to consider.
Here's some bonus tips. Cyber insurance, look into it. It may not be for everybody. It may not be for you, but cyber insurance can help cover the costs associated with ransomware attacks and breaches. And in a lot of cases, they have resources that they can allocate to you in the event that you declare a disaster. So that's included in your policy in most cases, and most people don't even know that because they've never reached out to their cyber insurance company to find that stuff out.
Yeah.
But consider it, look into it, determine if it's right for you. I'm not going to say it's always going to be cheap, but it may be worth it in your case, depending on the size of your business and your appetite for risk.
Threat intelligence, Kevin. Threat intelligence. Use threat intelligence services to stay informed about the latest ransomware threats and tactics. And there are many of those services out there that you can use, free services that you can use to follow up on it and know what's happening and know what the potential attacks are. A good example of that is when you're in an election year or you have certain events that are happening in your area, there could be notifications or warnings or other bulletins that have been sent out that's warning you to be more proactive in looking for potential threats to your environment. But you have to be looking for those things. You have to pay attention to it and you have to do your intelligence around it.
I'll piggyback one off of that too, is with threat intelligence, a lot of your next generation cybersecurity solutions, let's say you got an EDR and you've got next generation firewalls and you've got a really good email protection solution. All of these defenses are going to have threat intelligence feeds that they consume that are constantly being updated by what's going on in the wild and what's going on with their other customer base. So somebody that's another customer of theirs may get hit with a 0-day ransomware. That information immediately goes into the threat intelligence feed and gets pushed down to all the other customers to protect them. The cool thing I've seen is that with most of these top-notch vendors in the cybersecurity space, you can use their APIs and share those feeds across all of those solutions.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
you can further impact your threat intelligence by sharing the feeds from one to the other.
Yep. Absolutely.
Regular testing. Conduct regular drills and what, Jason?
Tabletops.
To ensure your incident response plan is effective and that the team members are all familiar with their role. Doesn't do you any good at all to define a group of incident response players, a team, if they don't know what the hell they're going to do in the event of a catastrophic disaster in your environment. So run through those exercises, practice how you're going to play.
Yes, absolutely. So a little bonus tip, a couple of other things to keep in mind when you're doing this stuff. You also want to make sure you're aware of legal frameworks that pertain to you and your organization. Some of those, for example, in the United States, there are the HIPAA, which is the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act for healthcare. There's the Graham-Leach-Bliley Bliley Act, GLBA, for financial data. There's several others associated as well. You'll want to make sure you understand what those are in the United States. And if you're only operating in the United States, but if you're operating across borders, especially in Europe, then you also need to consider GDPR. And GDPR puts protections for the European citizens. And those protections are really, really broad and deep. And if you haven't read through GDPR, you'll want to do that, because any type of data within your organization that is being transacted from a European country or organization in Europe into your company, then creates additional safety measures that you have to take and put in place. Because the concern there is that you have an incident that can happen on your watch that could be affecting the citizens of the EU. So you want to make sure you keep your understanding up to date for GDPR. Some of the other jurisdictions that are covered are the Personal Data Protection Act, and that one's in Singapore, and the Privacy Act in Australia. Those are also key ones that you'll want to get yourself up to speed on and make sure you understand.
There's the element of stakeholder communication too. And I think it's important that we touch on this, because this kind of goes back to the reason why you want to make sure it's clear who's doing the talking in these events. And there's going to be people dedicated to this, but it's very legally important that those folks are maintaining transparent communication throughout the incident, throughout the recovery, to all stakeholders. And that could include your investors, partners and customers. And you're going to want to be clear about the steps that you took to address the incident and what you've done to prevent future breaches. A lot of people nowadays are enacting third-party breach protocols. So if you hear that one of your partners has been breached, you may immediately sever connections to them until you hear that they've recovered, and in some cases have had an outside party assess their environment to confirm they're ready to go back into business.
Yeah,
and,
absolutely.
It's important that you follow that and that communication chain.
Yeah, I've executed that several times when things have occurred, and understanding what's actually going behind there to keep my company safe. You have to take some measures like that sometimes. So Kevin, tell us a little bit about data breach notifications and what's important with that.
So if personal data gets compromised, companies are oftentimes required by law to inform that individual that their data has been breached. What was it? Was it their home addresses? Was it their social security numbers? Was it their credit card information? Was it whatever? I don't know, sexual preference. I have no idea what all could be included in that, but it's personally identifiable information about what? People. That's the most important thing these days. That's what started the whole GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation in the EU. It was all about protecting the people, not necessarily protecting company. And that has now since trickled over into the U.S. You see it in California with CCPA, California Consumer Privacy Act, and in the U.S. and other states. Unfortunately, in the U.S., it's still at a state level. There's not one regulation for us to follow. I wish there was. I think it's still SHIELD Act up in New York, and there's dozens of states now that have their own defined regulations. Hopefully one day this will all become a singular framework that we can follow. But for now, just know if personal data of a human is involved, there are extra steps you need to take to be extremely cautious in how you divulge that information to those people.
Yeah, absolutely. So Kevin, look, we covered a lot of stuff. Let's take this into one more area before we're done. Let's talk about future trends in incident response and disaster recovery.
Yep. Cool.
So, we always are looking at what emerging technologies are going to present as threats associated with technology, as this will continue to change as we continue to advance. Emergent threats in cybersecurity continually evolve, and it has to be front and center on everything that we do. So the first place we'd look naturally would be in advanced persistent threats, APTs. They're sophisticated long-term cyber attacks often orchestrated by nation states or organized cyber criminals. And this is happening all the time, right? This is big business. And advanced persistent threats are a critical way that nation states attack us. So the key here is that it's always changing and evolving. You don't know what that APT is going to look like next. You can just try to plan, make sure you have your plans in place, make sure you have your ability to recover in place, expect that you're going to get hit by one of these. And when you do, you know what you have to do in order to get back up in line. And start running
those
again.
Advanced persistent threats can, they're known for being the type of threat that can reside in your environment for weeks, months, years at a time without being detected. They've established that back door into your environment.
And then boom, time bomb goes off.
Yeah.
And they start munching away at all your stuff.
They can time the attack, or they can exfiltrate as much data unknowingly until they finally bled you dry of everything you have to protect, and then hit you with the ransomware.
Yep, absolutely.
Not good. So speaking of ransomware evolutions. So what we're starting to see now is ransomware as a service. You're starting to see some of these malicious actors standing up their own ransomware tools for less skilled hackers to use, and to try to borrow, I guess, so to speak, so that they can attack their own targets and hope to get lucky and make a little money on the side using the ransomware as a service.
Yeah. So supply chain attacks, hit them where it hurts, man. Attack third-party vendors and suppliers to compromise primary targets. That's what that really is. And if you can take those things down, then all the customers that rely on those supply chain targets will also be impacted. As I was talking about earlier, it's kind of this chain event. An interesting story there, and an outside way of looking at this. Just today it was reported that it's believed that Russia was planting bombs on freight airlines that are targeting to land in the U.S. So again, as these freight airlines are bringing packages from overseas, they want to blow them up, get rid of them.
This was reported today?
Today, yeah, just today. So, and the only reason why they know that is the bombs actually went off in the warehouse before everything got loaded onto one of the airlines. Yeah.
Wow.
So impact the supply chain, you impact a lot of people, right?
Yeah. And what better time to do that than right in the middle of an election?
Yeah, exactly.
When everybody's heads are elsewhere, right?
Yeah.
All right. Well, how about cloud and security threats? So as we start to or continue to become more and more dependent on cloud services, new vulnerabilities are being introduced and new attack vectors are being introduced through that attack surface. So, you want to make sure that you're ensuring best practices when you take on cloud services. Make sure that you're confirming that these services that you're going to subscribe to are secure, that they're using secure practices, and there's ways you can do that. But do your diligence against those third-party cloud vendors and make sure that they're secure and that they're following best practice guidelines in cyber.
Yeah, that's
you don't want to just go with any old mom and pop cloud service. Trust me.
Yeah. IoT and OT vulnerabilities. So Internet of Things and operational technology. So in both of these cases, these are pieces of technology that have their own protocols that can be hacked. So keeping up to speed on what vulnerabilities are in those protocols and being able to have mitigating compensating controls in place to manage that.
Yep. coffee machines getting hacked.
Yeah.
Garage door openers getting hacked.
Yeah.
Baby monitors getting hacked.
Yeah.
All right. AI, machine learning exploits. Obviously, this is talked about every day now. How are adversarial attacks going to happen through AI? How is this technology going to allow hackers to be even more sophisticated with the types of attacks they're deploying? One of them being deepfakes. That's just one tactic that proves how quickly AI has been used against us successfully in a way that nobody really thought about when AI just really hit the scene in a mainstream way back in, 2022, the end of 2022. But now we're thinking about it. We were hearing about this. Companies have been scammed by these AI deepfake attacks. So keep your eye on AI.
0-day vulnerabilities. So those are vulnerabilities you know nothing about until something happens. And then everyone has to know about it because they're scrambling to get a patch in place to fix these vulnerabilities. So 0-day vulnerabilities, keep up to speed on those. The closer you are to getting a notice when a 0-day hits, then the faster you can take action. Kevin talked a little bit about threat intel a few minutes ago from some of the XDR, MDR, EDR systems that are out there. Use your threat intel to help you understand if a 0-day is happening.
Yeah. We hit on this one already, but data privacy regulations. This one's the one, it's all about protecting personal data. So you're thinking GDPR, CCPA. Become familiar with what your responsibilities are as a business owner or as a cybersecurity expert in charge of cyber at a large business. You are responsible if you're doing any kind of business in the European Union states or in any of these U.S. states that are now holding you responsible through these regulations. You may not know it, but you are responsible. It's not on them to educate you to know that.
Yeah.
These regulations are real. They're becoming more prevalent. You need to be aware of it in your role as a cyber expert.
Yeah. Remote work challenges. We've all have gone to remote work now, or hybrid, and there are many risks associated with that. We talk a lot about ways to ensure the protections of your employee base, both if you are in office or if you are remote. Some of the strategies you can put in place, like a VPN, would be one of those to ensure that your communications are protected and encrypted. But even policies play a big role here in training, in educating your employees on how to work safely remotely.
Yep. And phishing and social engineering. This one goes back to that user awareness training. Phishing attacks are becoming more sophisticated, even though they are an old school way to breach companies. They're not going away. And the main reason for that is because they're still successful. They're still a very effective way to get a foothold into an organization through lack of training, lack of education, and poor security technology in place to protect you for when those employees do fail. So phishing and social engineering is something that it needs to be top of mind, because again, that's that 95% attack surface right there. Yeah. Train those employees.
And lastly, quantum computing, because as quantum computing continues to explode, we're going to find even more sophisticated ways to break encryption. And encryption standards are going to have to stay changing to keep us safe. That's just or we're going to have to do something different than traditional encryption. Maybe it will be a quantum encryption or some quiption. Something like that.
Quiption. Quiption.
I think I just invented something.
Quiption.
So that just really means stay diligent on doing the right things with your standards for password protection, for authentication, for authorization, for those types of things, because at the end of the day, you want to have multiple layers to deter an attacker.
And don't just assume every threat's going to come from the outside. There's also insider threats you need to think about. Disgruntled employees that are pissed off and just want to make a statement or want to wreak havoc in your organization. Maybe a disgruntled former IT administrator. That's the worst kind because they already have elevated privilege and can wreck your life.
Yeah.
So have tools in place to help you identify any kind of behavior that shouldn't be going on in your environment without some level of approved authority, or even in a lot of cases, a second level of approval.
Yeah. Well, Kevin, we covered a ton of stuff. And like you said at the beginning, this could easily have been 2 episodes. We really had to go fast through a lot of this stuff to get it down. And we still even went, a lot longer than we wanted to go. But that's because there's just so much information here to cover and to make sure people understand when we talk about incident response and disaster recovery. Please, people, please feel free to rewatch this episode, pick up a couple of things and move on and come back to it when you need it. There will always be more in here, and absolutely do not forget to do your tabletops.
Tabletops.
Yeah.
It's almost like the fire talks.
Yeah. So with that, we're going to sign off this episode, and we want to thank you all for joining us in season 3. Come back for season 4. Bring your friends, bring your family, bring your colleagues, and it's guaranteed to be action-packed with a lot of really good stuff and great guests. So join us then.
Next season will be epic. We promise you. We're going to continue on some of these awesome guests, and we have some surprises up our sleeves for next season. We'll unveil that when the time is right. But thank you all for listening. We'll see you again in just a couple of months. Take care.
See ya.
I'm Ashley. I'm an artificially generated avatar with the ability to manipulate your mind via the power of my intelligence botnets. Let me prove it to you. You're about to click on that subscribe button, and then you'll click on the notification bell so you don't miss when Kevin and Jason drop future episodes of the Cyber Distortion Podcast. So, go ahead. That's right. Slide your mouse over slowly and gracefully. There you go. Now click. See, that wasn't so bad now, was it? I'd like to thank you for listening to today's amazing podcast episode on YouTube or your favorite audio streaming platform, and don't forget to tell your friends. Oh, and remain diligent, my cyber friends. The world is a very scary place.